Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And today we want to talk about the murder of Brian Thompson, the UnitedHealth CEO. And this is a good example. It's a story I think lots of us have been following. We just didn't really have enough to say anything of substance. There's a lot of speculation as to who was the killer, what was the motivation, and all of that. And I think we finally have enough detail to go ahead and dive into this story and think it through. So, Cameron, from the outset, this was okay. Over one, like New York averages about 1.5 murders a day. So somebody getting shot in the United States is not really a story. This one was, in the sense that it was a very targeted attack. It was picking out a specific person that was actually unknown to the other person over a corporate. We can get into the motivations of it, but some fairly clever elements to it, including writing on the shell casings and that sort of thing, that linked it to kind of this is a healthcare issue, apart from the fact that it was the CEO of a health insurance company. And then the fact that he kind of got out of the city really without being recorded made it look a little more professional early on than it turned out to be. And so there were just some interesting elements of this whole story and, of course, details coming to light. But I would say, just to put my cards on the table starting off, and then I want to hear what you were thinking about this, is that actually part of the reason that this tragedy, fascinating isn't the right word, that sounds incorrect to say, but it sort of points to a fundamental breakdown of our culture on multiple levels simultaneously. It pokes, it shines light on so many different aspects and avenues of what I would say are things that are not healthy signs. So yeah, all of this we could put back in a health context of saying all of this points to something deeply unhealthy about the United States of America right now and what's going on in a lot of people's lives.
Yes, and it's captured the public imagination in a very interesting way as well. So one interesting read on that initially, and I'll qualify this after I say it, but on social media, and I've seen this myself, but it's being widely reported, the responses to this have been very telling. Many people are pretty happy about it, and you've got some very ruthless responses. Whereas in the past, you might have had somebody, give voice to the fact that, well, this man was married. He was a father. He had a wife. He had a family. He was a human being. Now the responses to that are even more callous. They're sort of, well, yeah, but what about all of the families, the husbands and the wives and the children he defrauded? Good riddance. I've seen some comparisons, some people comparing him to, one kind of meme that was going around was comparing him to Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, when you kind of come to that the most grim of the three ghosts, the ghost of Christmas future, who takes Scrooge to a not too distant future where he has perished, and people are not unhappy that he's dead. They're basically kind of dancing on his grave. So that comparison was being made. So that is an indicator of what we know this already, but a deep sense of distrust and indeed hatred of many of our institutions in North America. Healthcare, of course, is an extremely contested topic in North America. And let's face it, our healthcare system is not good. It's very bad. And part of none of that justifies anything that happened here. But yeah, let me pause there for a second.
Well, hang on a second, because we want to be clear. When you say our healthcare system is not good, it's the best in the world for what it does. You're talking about the funding and the payment structure and the financial side of the healthcare system. I don't think anybody would want to contest that people routinely travel to the United States for surgeries and operations, and that we do have some of the best medical science out there. However, we are a very sick nation just in general. I think back during COVID, I was looking at the statistics of the percentage of the U.S. population that is considered to be healthy is right around 2%. So we do have poor outcomes from our healthcare system, but a lot of that has to do with, I don't think we can stick it on doctors that people are 100 pounds overweight or commit suicide. So the
Mm.
outcomes are, and this is going to be an important part of the future of this conversation, is who's responsible for what as far as our health goes.
Right.
And that's part of the issue there. So I just want to, and maybe you see it differently, but we're putting my cards on the table. I think our healthcare, as far as the types of operations that we can do, and the access to it, is comparatively good. Now, everybody that I know, including myself, has horror stories about trying to figure out insurance and the whole apparatus for the finances of it and all of that. So happy to see that point. But I would want to separate out the potential quality and capacities versus the financial element of it.
No, and what I'm pointing to is mainly the public discontent when it comes to the convoluted system that you just mentioned, but also how difficult it is to get coverage for many people. Yes, if you look at it comparatively, obviously the U.S. holds massive advantages. That being said, we all have those horror stories that you just mentioned, Nathan, and you do have. So on the shell casings, what were the two of the words were there, but what are those three
deny,
words?
depose, or
And
there's
then defend. Deny, depose,
yeah.
defend. Right. So that's a kind of grim inside joke about what the basically the tactics of insurance companies in trying to deny claims and basically, save money and not pay out. Now, and I mean, again, we could get lost in the weeds there because there are major political debates over all of that. Nathan, you pointed out there's a debate for instance on where the responsibility really lies mainly with individuals or with companies and different agencies. Then there's the private sector. Then different people will talk about capitalism and all that. So I don't want to talk. I think we can bracket all of that, but the fact that those words were on the shell casings was the first indicator that this was a politically motivated crime and that some real thought went behind it. So I think maybe now we bring in a few details about the murderer himself. So Luigi, help me on that last name again, Nathan. Mangione. Okay, so Luigi Mangione. He is very interesting for a number of different reasons. So he comes from a very privileged background, and if you read up on this news story, sorry, we just have to recite a few facts because they're pertinent to the discussion. But so he comes from a wealthy family in the Baltimore, Maryland area. He was valedictorian of his class
and private high school.
Of a private all boys high school, and it's the internet being what it is now. Of course, you can watch his valedictorian speech. It's very surreal to be able to have access to all this footage these days.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Also, Ivy League student, graduated from University of Pennsylvania,
master's there,
and got a undergrad and master's there. So clearly, a very bright guy, described as such. People who knew him so far, I know, more details will always emerge, but the people who knew him are pretty shocked that this happened. They described him as a nice guy, very smart. It wasn't, he didn't seem to have a personality profile that would lead you to believe that this is what he would do. But of course, a number of different other factors this is one of those cases, Nathan, where we have actually, in the initial stages, a lot more details than we usually do with this kind of crime. A lot. So we've got a manifesto. You and I both read sort of the condensed version of that, and many of you who are avid news junkies probably came across this. It was an independent journalist published it first on his Substack, but I'm sure we'll see all the full manifesto here pretty soon. But also, it appears that Luigi had his own bad brush up with the healthcare system. He sustained a spinal injury, I believe, in a surfing. I think it had to do with hiking and surfing is what I came across. I'm sure more details will emerge there. But on his X account, I think he had a picture of an X-ray of his spine and the hardware that's in there now. So he clearly didn't have a very good experience there. So politically motivated crime, it's unique in the sense that this is I think one of the first in a long time where somebody in the private sector has been targeted. Brian Thompson was there for a shareholders meeting, I think, right, in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and they have Luigi in custody now. He's remained defiant. You can see the footage of him screaming about how everybody's completely out of touch and, ignorant of what's going on right now. So I mean, he hasn't. The pictures that you see, he's also, again, it's just an interesting. He's a good-looking, healthy kid. Yeah, not kid. He's 26, but
I'm not completely sure that we have the cause and effect here. Okay, anytime somebody just goes and shoots somebody, obviously there's going to be some irrationality to the whole system. But it's interesting to me to know like why he thinks it's the insurance company's fault for his own. Because you have some people who are like, okay, look, here's a kid who jacks up his back surfing, and then the doctors can't magically fix him, so he shoots a healthcare executive, an insurance executive. Like, okay, what's the cause and effect there? So, I mean, he's also traveling. He comes from a family who's loaded. Okay, there's that. He was traveling. He had $8,000 of cash with him when they picked him up. He'd been living in Honolulu, working remotely to San Francisco. Because initially, so it happens, you don't know who did it, and you go, okay, here's somebody who's probably making $25,000 a year and gets a medical bill for $30,000 that insurance denies, and it strings them out financially, and they have nothing to live for, and so they do this as a, go out in a blaze of glory kind of thing. That's not the story. I'm pretty sure the finances of his operation were not the limiting factor in his life. So, to what degree his actual physical pain and his experience were the motivation compared to just maybe so yeah, he had this bubbly, ambitious personality, but then in the last year, not. Like, he basically fell off the grid of everybody who knew him, maybe went into some pretty dark places in his head. And he doesn't mention his own physical pain in his little manifesto pick-me-up letter. He's saying, look, UnitedHealth is one of the largest and growing financial shareholding institutions in the United States behind Apple and Google. It's growing increasingly. We have the most expensive healthcare in the world, and we're 42nd in life expectancy. This is just, the American people are being hoodwinked into this, and I had to do something just to basically. So he, because he says this is a symbolic killing. I don't think he had anything against Brian Thompson personally or individually. He sees it as a symbolic manifestation of issues that he is campaigning for. So it's I don't know to what degree to actually put his own experience with the medical system, or is he doing this purely in a politicized, philosophical, taking up for the broken poor, how he sees. I mean, so he's yelling about injustice, and this almost points back into the Awakening podcast that we did, where here you have somebody who would be considered part of the cultural elite up and coming,
right,
who then does this. And then here's what's weird to me, Cameron, is so Jon Stewart talked about this, and they're like, oh, and somebody ratted him out at a McDonald's, and the crowd booed.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So Jon Stewart, I would put right in the core of the cultural elite and the people who probably show up on the set of The Daily Show. So you have the cultural elite cheering the killing of the cultural elite by the cultural elite. That's what's
a perfect
weird to
example.
Me in this.
Well, what you just pointed out is a perfect example of what Musa Al-Gharbi talks about as those symbolic and thoroughly hypocritical gestures of cultural elites. Yeah, so they are, if they really subscribed deeply to, on the face of it, Luigi's philosophical and horrendously real gesture, then they would have to recognize that they are part of the very problem. But and so is presumably Luigi. The difference is he actually did something. So yes, there's that aspect. What I also find there are many troubling features here. The most troubling of all is that somebody lost their life, or somebody's life was taken from them, and now the family is suffering and all the friends are suffering. I mean, human life has been taken. That's serious. Now, it may have been a symbolic gesture in some ways, but it wasn't. But in the end, it wasn't symbolic. It was completely and totally literal. So that's troubling enough. But the public response that you're pointing to is, to my mind, horrifying. I'll put my cards on the table, because it's an outworking of what we've been talking about for a while. And, we draw a lot from James Davison Hunter's latest book, Democracy and Solidarity. But that is cultural nihilism right there. The notion that acts like this are in some way a helpful or a productive way to get something done. Well, the American people are powerless, and then these massive institutions wield all this unfair power. So this is what we need to do to take power back. We need to go kill somebody. And even if it's
And actually, that's the ending of his little manifesto is, this is about power. And so basically this is what we have to resort to.
And I'm crushed under the heel.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm crushed under the heel of this really powerful system. And so we have to, this is the only way to get stuff done. The traditional democratic channels don't work anymore, and we need to actually make things happen. What I fear, Nathan, and here's where I'm going to sound kind of grim, I fear that we're going to see a whole lot more of this. Yeah, I do. Because
that's quite possible. No, I think that's the end. So, okay, let's, to reiterate, somebody got murdered. And I think the fracture that we see out of this is that it has been part of the solidarity of the American experience that when somebody gets killed, we grieve or lament. Mm-hmm. You can see the rupture in our cultural solidarity when now somebody gets killed and people cheer. That is a big switch. Like, we want to point that out as a turning point here.
It's a grim switch is what it is. Yeah. And because the word solidarity is really important, Hunter chose that very deliberately. He didn't choose a word like consensus, because consensus is just too clinically rational, according to him. Solidarity has to do with deep bonds of human affection. If you could give voice to some sentiment along the lines of, yes, but in the end, aren't we all human? That would be solidarity, probably in its most basic form. And the fact that somebody just got killed, and we can't do that. The public, large segments of the public can't or are unwilling to do that. I mean, you make some allowances for social media licensing bringing out the worst in some of us. Mm-hmm. But still, I have the sickening feeling that a lot of people meant that when they put that down. That it wasn't just limited to social media. People booing in the McDonald's. Yeah, this was a more widespread kind of, and also, they're just, I hate to say it. There's some weird. This is a good-looking kid. He's athletic. He's got kind of an interesting look. A lot of people are already romanticizing him.
There are pictures in New York of the security footage where he's shooting the guy in the back, and then it just says "Hope" underneath it, that are stapled to the telephone poles. Mm-hmm. So when you have that kind of like shoot a random wealthy person, and that can be lauded, suddenly somebody who doesn't have a lot to live for, doesn't know what the meaning of their life is, has something to at least make a name for themselves. If they can't produce anything else.
Yes, which is why I think you're basically, with all of that, you're incentivizing other disturbed people to take some of their fantasies all the way.
I think that's would you not say that it's possible that that's what's fully intended by what he did? I think he might be clever enough to know that. I mean, that is that when you say it's symbolic, it means you're starting something, not that you are a one-off actor here.
No, I do think that. And I think, many of the way this has played out in ways that I think he intended, and including that public response, and including motivating future offenders, so to speak. So, yeah, one of the factors that stood out to me here is that this person is somebody I wouldn't just, you can't just write him off. He's got some real thought behind this. He's got, yeah, I mean, there are some naive aspects that you can kind of scoff at, but all the scoffing stops when you realize how terribly literal everything is that he did and how far he was willing to go. So it's a very sick cultural moment, and that's confirmed by the perverse response to what's happened here. And I think we're going to, again, this is where, as Christians, we have to really be people of prayer, people of scripture, and people who go to church, because the more this happens, the more strange the world is going to become. When you find yourself saying, yes, but human life is sacred, no matter who the person is, no matter how seemingly wicked you believe a Brian Thompson or, a wealthy elite, a Scrooge-like person in your mind is, they're still a person, still a human being. If you come to a cultural place where everybody around you, the air that we breathe is, no, some people just don't deserve to live. And those happen from time to time. If we peek into our history books, not so distant past, that's a perennial, well, if we look around the world, that's a perennial problem of the human race where, no, but certain people are less human than others.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that again. So when that becomes a prevailing narrative, though, when your plausibility structure has everybody around you saying that, we are deeply influenceable. And it's very difficult to not start getting pulled into that line of thinking, which is why this is that rare Thinking Out Loud podcast where I sound kind of grim and I'm using extremely strong language like this is a horrifying response. This is a grim response. This is a perverse response. I'm doing that because I think strong language is called for here. We need to state very clearly this was a heinous action that took place. The public response is completely and woefully morally misguided, and we need help.
So there's also a subtle, I think, misunderstanding. So we're moving into the category slightly that, okay, so Brian Thompson made $10 million last year or something. I mean, that's a chunk of change by any standard. But there's this idea that's at play here that the wealthy are always tyrannical. So let's look at another. So Assad has flown the coup, right? Massive revolution in Syria. He's off to Moscow, pulling down his statue, cheering, toppling, shooting up the posters of him, and looting the presidential residence. Do you call it a presidential residence if you're a dictator? I don't know. Anyway, so that's celebration, cheering in the streets. Probably if he had been killed, there would have been the same response that a significant portion of the nation would have been cheering.
Yep.
How then do we map that onto a
yeah, that's right. It's a good question.
A similar response is going on here. One is the Lord doesn't delight in the death of the wicked. So even if you are part of a regime change, celebrating the death of someone isn't good. But on the flip side, Assad versus Brian Thompson is orders of magnitude different in the actual outcome that it influences in the course of a nation. And so, because people are like, okay, the Walmart, Rockefellers, Carnegie, all of these people who made, I don't even know how much money, but they did that by making the products cheaper for everybody else. Mm-hmm. So the reason that Rockefeller got crazy rich is because he figured out how to make the price of fuel so much cheaper for everybody. So there was a time in which characters like that were lauded because they said, yeah, these people should be financially compensated for the fact that they're making our lives easier and they're making our lives better. And it's better for me as an individual for them to make a lot of money if them making a lot of money makes things cheaper and more efficient for me. That's the opposite of what people usually feel about their healthcare system and their insurance plan. So that might be one of the differences there. But yeah, we want to be careful of saying that the well-to-do are always tyrants. And therefore, so if you can make the syllogism, wealth is always achieved through tyranny, tyrants are always wrong, therefore the death of the wealthy is always good. Some big missteps at every step there.
Yeah. No, that's true. And there are qualitative distinctions to be made there between, different types of wealthy people and powerful people. And yes, there are in this world actual tyrants. The last time, but do we, again, as Christians, we're going to look strange here. I remember the last time that was a big question of how we should respond to the death of somebody who really was a horrendous human being was when we had
Osama bin Laden was
Laden.
the first one, and then was it Soleimani? Who was the other guy a couple years back? I think we did a podcast on both of those. I was saying, yeah, even as a Christian, you can't really rejoice in Osama getting killed,
right? Yes, and
which even is a weird sentence to say out loud.
It is, and it's very understandable. And of course, inevitably, Hitler is in somebody's head. This applies to every human being. And it's strange to say that out loud.
Yeah, but it's stranger if you don't make that statement and then you try to figure out who's worthy of living and who isn't.
Right. So because then you're putting yourself in the position of God.
Yeah. Well, it sounds absolutist to say you can't delight in the death of anyone wicked. But compared to what? Compared to then we all get to decide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to go down that sliding board.
When we go down... Yeah, so when we go down this road, and so have we veered way off of what's the the story we're just talking about? It may seem that way, but I actually don't think we have. From this whole incident, a lot of this comes back to the thought that we can somehow administer ultimate justice as human beings. Now, the law is important, and to a significant degree, earthly laws are in human hands. And there is work to be done there. And there are times where reforms are needed for sure. But ultimate justice, the notion that, the world is literally on our shoulders. As Christians, we are liberated from that terrible burden because we know that it is not on our shoulders, that the world is in God's hands, including justice. So the one who will administer ultimate justice is the Lord himself. And I do find helpful Miroslav Volf's two images that he draws from Scripture. And this comes from his book, Exclusion and Embrace, which speaks powerfully to the need for justice and the temptation to try to take it into our own hands. But he talks about the two images of Christ, the one of the spotless lamb, which is obviously a picture of meekness, and then the fierce rider on the horse who comes to bring judgment and to judge the quick and the dead, to use church language. Both are true, and we need both. So you have, those are pictures of simultaneously of God's mercy and God's justice. The only way, he argues, and this is, some people have criticized this quite heavily, but I think it's a pretty compelling argument. But he basically says that we can forgive, a significant reason for why we can forgive our enemies and those who do things that are unforgivable, like rape, murder, defraud the helpless, all of that, tyrants. The reason we can do that is because we know that the justice of those people is in the Lord's hands. Mm-hmm. And so therefore that burden is lifted from us. Yeah, it's outsourced.
You see that if you're thinking about this being difficult and want to look at 1 Peter 2, specifically around 22, 23 in there, some very helpful things on Jesus' suffering, leaving you an example. And to this you were called. When they hurled their insults, he didn't retaliate. When they threatened, he remained silent. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. So you see this pattern in Christ during his crucifixion of outsourcing, as it were, ultimate justice. The one other unsettling and I think, kind of clarifying element of this story, take the Luigi situation here, is so many of the things that we would have said would prevent something like this happening. Gun laws, mental health, education, access to finance. Those really weren't factors here. You couldn't, like, I'm trying to sit here and think what law could you have passed, Cameron, that would have prevented this from happening? And it just shows, It shows not just the shortcomings of the legal system to provide justice, but it also shows the shortcomings of the legal system to provide protection in a culture where people don't have solidarity on a core set of beliefs about the value. Like, I don't think you could hire enough bodyguards to protect this guy from what happened there. I don't think you could pass enough gun laws. I don't think you could maybe he needed more education. Okay. Maybe he needed more money. $8,000 in cash in your pocket, Ivy League master's degree. Like, there isn't a way that you could stereotype in advance and say, oh, if only he had
all of the resources,
and legally, all of the resources, except if you could say, if only he had an idea, the image of God being stamped upon all humanity and that all human life is sacred, could that have been prevented? So it's not the solution to this is not legal.
No, and that's something that is a perennial. Well, that's something I think we're struggling with so deeply as a culture, and I think everybody, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, everybody, because we're trying to figure out how we solve this problem, how we fix this, and people, wise sociologists have been saying, and a lot of other people have been saying for a long time, laws are necessary, but they're insufficient. They're at the very end of the line, you have laws. They do very little. In fact, they can, in some cases, if you're really culturally sick, they do almost nothing at all. This is Hunter, and remember the whole section where he talks about Jim Crow era and how laws really did very little to help the plight of African Americans during those horrendous years. What had to happen was a change in public sentiment. So really, we can speak not as sociologists here, but just very clearly is with the authority of Christ. The problem here is spiritual in our nation. What you were mentioning about Luigi, needing a revitalized view of human beings as made in the image of God, that's a spiritual issue. Deep, dark depression. All right, we're trying to fix that by medicating ourselves out of it. And that's why also I don't think I've ever in my life, Nathan, heard so many people telling me that they are, self-identifying as manic depressive or bipolar. And admittedly, I can be skeptical when people do that, but also I'm skeptical because I just know there are not that many people who have that condition. But what I don't doubt is that people have very violent mood swings and that they are extremely unhappy. That I believe.
Well, so we're going to see some of that because there's, a lot of conversation here about his recent experimentation with psilocybin and mushrooms and all sorts of other things and the impact that would have on mental health. So that'll be part of the continued conversation here. We'll have to wait and see a bit on this specific case, but I think we can generally say, I think last time I looked, 85% of the American population is on a prescription medication. Years ago, Wendell-Berry's been saying this forever, that whenever what is wrong with you stimulates the economy more than what's right with you, that's a sign of a deeply unhealthy country. And so it is significant that a lot of the money being made in the country has to do with healthcare and pharmaceuticals and the whole thing that everybody feels like is a scam. So you can, as a Christian, say something is wrong and unjust. And you know what? Wendell-Berry never shot anybody because of that. Although he probably understands the question and the issues better than this kid does. Well, actually, I'm pretty confident to say he does.
Oh, he does, yeah.
So there's a certain amount of knowledge that's dangerous. And that's what this kid had. And then there's a level of knowledge that helps you grieve and contextualize and then discern how to live well. And that's what this kid didn't have.
And what Wendell-Berry's doing is, well, let's be honest. Wendell-Berry is fighting a losing battle. And he knows he's fighting a losing battle. And to a certain degree, from an earthly standpoint, if we look at life under the sun, let's look through an Ecclesiastes lens. All of us, part of our task and our calling, our prophetic calling as believers, is to fight losing battles. In the sense that we're going up against grave injustice and immorality, because this is a fallen human order that we can't possibly change ultimately. We can't completely change it. But Does that mean we can't make any difference at all? No, it doesn't. We can. But the slow, careful work of reform is always going to look a lot less glamorous. It's going to take way more patience and time than some morbid and vile publicity stunt like Luigi just pulled off.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is I think this is good to articulate that we are called as Christians to fight a losing battle, and not to adopt the warfare techniques and tactics of the culture that we claim to be fighting. So if you pick up the principles and the techniques of that which you are decrying, what point are you making? So if you're going to kill people to say that killing people is bad, you're going to shoot the healthcare executive because you think he's leading to the deaths of other people, then you're leading to the death of a person who you think, like, it's what it all comes down to. Violence is the only antidote to power if you can only play
nihilism.
by those systems of power. And so that's what the church offers, is a different way to, quote, play the game or, quote, fight the battle that don't resort to the destructive elements and natural inclinations and motivations of the human heart. So we'll just keep that in the back of our mind there as we bring this to a close, that you can't fight a system if the system is totally corrupt. You can't join the system and use the corrupt means to fight the corrupt system and still have any integrity in it. And certainly you can't do that in a Christ-like way. So again, Cameron, the whole thing I find to be sad. It's tragic. It's sad for the individuals involved. It's sad for the state of our country. It points to deep lack of health just in our culture in general in so many ways. And so there's a lot to lament there, but certainly having a lot to lament is not justification for sticking our heads in the sand and not engaging our neighbors and our family and the world around us well. So be of good cheer. Justice will happen, and we can rest in that.
Yeah, we can rest in that. Rest being the key word there. Well, thanks for listening in. This is kind of a heavy podcast, and yes, I think there are times where we just have to be honest about the troubling moment that we're in, but also we can rest in a genuinely in the fact that our Lord is in control and that many, many good things are happening. And it's a fresh call for us to be salt and light in a culture filled with many people who are very unhappy. So let's ask the Lord to bring those people into our lives so that we can listen to them, love them, and show them the way of our Lord. That's what they really need. All the cultural resources in the world can't save us. In the end, we need Christ. It's that simple. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.